All right. Well, this is with friends like these, who needs enemies? Our second and third workshops, we kind of drop some bombs of reality on what goes on the college campus. And of course, what Ben Shapiro had to say was excellent stuff. Well, these last two workshops are a little more lighthearted. So make yourself comfortable, and these two workshops, we talked about, okay, here's the problem. These workshops deal with, okay, now this is your strategy. This is the things that you need to do in order to survive and thrive on the college campus. Thus, with friends like these, who needs enemies? We're talking about relationships in this class, because relationships are important to young people and old people and all kinds of people. And to kick this off, I taught a message to the teenagers years ago called "How Not to Be a Loser Magnet," and in that message, I came up with, it was kind of a play on with "you might be a redneck if" kind of thing, and I just thought I'd share some of the how you might be a loser magnet things that we shared with the teens. Number one, if you ever looked around at your friends and said to yourself, "I'm surrounded by idiots," then you might be a loser magnet. Number two, if you ever decided to hate your friends because they were losers and then hung out with them anyway, then you might be a loser magnet. Number three, if you ever stopped being friends with your loser friends, then join yourself to a new group of losers, then you might be a loser magnet. Number four, if you ever stopped hanging out with your loser friends at school only to end up hanging out with your loser friends at church, then you might be a loser magnet. Number five, if you ever thought to yourself, "I'm such a loser," but you really enjoy hanging out with people who act just like you, then you might be a loser magnet. Number six, if you change boyfriends or girlfriends more often than you change your own underwear, then you might be a loser magnet. Number seven, this is kind of a youth group thing, but if you are currently sitting in a section that I will have to yell at before the night is over, then you might be a loser magnet. Number eight, if your favorite thing to say is, "All my friends talk bad about me," and all your friends say you talk bad about them, then you might be a loser magnet. Number nine, if you honestly believe that everyone stabs you in the back, then you might be a loser magnet. Number 10, if you ever dated someone and said, "But they have so much potential," then you might be a loser magnet. Number 11, if you use the word hypocrite in nearly every conversation, then you might be a loser magnet. And last but not least, if you or your friends want to try out for American Idol, then you might be a loser magnet. Making the right relationships during your college years is crucial to your success, but it's not easy. I'm going to give in these workshops 4 indispensable relationships for surviving college. 4 indispensable relationships for surviving college. Indispensable relationship number 1, relationship with God. And it's this simple: be a friend of God. In James chapter 2, verse 23, it says Abraham was called the friend of God. What a great tribute to Abraham that he was called the friend of God. In 1 Samuel 30, verse 6, it says David encouraged himself in the Lord. And now, speaking of, we could hearken back to the second and third workshop and talk about it. It's that this is and I like what Ben Shapiro says, that see these things as an opportunity, and that it can be a trying environment on the college campus. But in those times, that's a time for you to develop your relationship like never before with God. Be His friend. That there's never an excuse to be lonely, because God's always there, and you can always be a friend to Him, and that's so important. And there's times when you maybe need to encourage yourself in the Lord, and He will be there, and He'll give you the strength that you need. There's 2 keys to being a friend of God that are necessary: obedience and faith. If you're going to be a friend of God, then you must obey Him. What's the Word says? If you love me, keep my commandments. If you love me, obey my commandments. Obedience is essential, and faith. It takes faith. It says in the Bible, without faith it's impossible to please God. So 2 keys to being a friend of God are obedience and faith. And then 3 areas to strengthen your relationship with God is prayer, the Bible, and being in church. And as a young person, that's very important. That's important to have that discipline in your life, even if you're not on the college campus, but how crucial is it to not miss those times, those quality times of those intimate times with God, of prayer. You need to pray every day. Read your Bible. You need to read your Bible every day. And thirdly, be in church. Get spiritually fed. And we talked about that in this, that it's important that we not be alienated from family and church, but be hooked up with the church. Get planted in. Get plugged in. And if you do those things, that'll go a long ways. Indispensable relationship number 2, and this is a relationship that a lot of young people quickly want to dispense with, but relationship with leaders. Relationship with leaders. See, leaders are important. Leaders provide wisdom and guidance, but they provide accountability. See, one of the exciting things about going to college is you get to experience some of the independence and freedom of adulthood with virtually no credentials to show you can navigate through young adulthood successfully. And it's so exciting. I'm free. I can go out and I'm an adult now. But you've had literally no experience under your belt. It's almost like just because you've turned the legal age that you're legally an adult, it's kind of like, okay, so you're old enough to drive, but you haven't even really gone through driver's ed or anything. We're just going to throw you behind a wheel and see how it goes. You have to understand that just because you're legally an adult, you need a relationship with leaders because you have no experience. Just to be real politically incorrect, at this stage, in many ways, you're just an idiot. You need some people to help you not be dumb. I'm not being condescending. It's just a fact of life that when you have no experience in something, it helps to have someone that knows what they're talking about to speak into your life and help you to navigate young adulthood successfully. USA Today published an article in September of 2004 that cited a study by the American Sociological Association that listed 5 standards considered typical markers of adulthood. Number 1 is that they've finished school. Number 2, that you'd left home. Number 3, that you'd gotten married. Number 4, that you had a child. And number 5, that you achieved financial independence. Those were considered the 5 markers because each of those take a greater degree of maturity to handle that thing. Finished school, left home, got married, had a child, and achieved financial independence. Those are considered the 5 markers of adulthood. Each of these markers of adulthood require a greater measure of responsibility and maturity that is necessary to be a successful adult. Now, see, when you were a teenager, your parents set something called boundaries around you to protect you from hurting yourself. But see, when you're old enough for college, a lot of those boundaries disappear. Why? Is it because you're old enough to hurt yourself now? No, it's because you're old enough to know better. And so when the boundaries disappear, the consequences of our choices are still there. You now have the added responsibility to govern yourself, to make the right choices without someone having to make you do the right thing. The best preparation for adulthood is when you're a teenager. You want to be a successful adult, be a successful teenager. But as you're transitioning, understand the importance of those boundaries that were set in your life because they were to help you learn how to govern yourself. Because if those boundaries are gone, are you going to govern well? Are you going to apply this? Because it'll save you from a lot of pain. When the boundaries disappear, the consequences of our choices are still there. You now have the added responsibility to govern yourself, to make the right choices without someone having to make you do the right thing. The point is this: as a responsible adult, you have to choose to set boundaries on yourself through accountability to others, since no one can make you do the right thing anymore. And see, that's why the second relationship with leaders is so indispensable to the young college-age person, because you no longer have to obey your parents' house rules, but a wise son or daughter will respect and honor his or her parents' superior position and experience in a life enough to allow them to continue to speak into your life. You may be out of the house, you may not be under their roof, but if you're smart, you're going to listen. You may no longer see your pastor as often as when you were a youth, and you may miss church more because no one can force you to go. But a mature young person will stay accountable to his or her pastor and continue involvement in a local church because this will help you succeed. Thirdly, you may have more freedom to commit crimes, but a mature young person will respect the law and those who enforce it. You may have the freedom to dislike your parents, rules, pastors, God, teachers, your boss, but a wise young person will be accountable to those over him or her and respect their authority figures. You see, another reason you must have a good relationship with your leaders is perhaps the biggest temptation you'll experience on the college campus is the temptation of pride that leads to rebellion. That's possibly the biggest temptation that you have. That's why accountability and leadership and submission to authority is so crucial to a young person's success. Accountability requires humility and will keep you from being puffed up in your own mind. Humility will keep you growing in maturity. Again, to hearken back to the first workshop, Ed Cole said, stubbornness is the core of ignorance. Indispensable relationship number 2 is your relationship with your leaders. Indispensable relationship number 3 is your relationship with friends. Your relationship with friends. Find friends who make you sharp. Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. And on this note, I highly recommend, there's a book that I recommend that if you're going to college that you consider picking up and reading, and it's called University of Destruction by David Wheaton. And in one of those chapters, he gives something called the friendship test. That's so neat that you can evaluate your relationships, and you examine your relationships. You say, this is a beneficial friendship. You list, basically it goes like this. You list the top 10 friends that you think of, that you list the top 10 friends, the people that you associate with, and people you consider friend. You make that list. And then you evaluate how much time, then you assign a number, how much time you spend with them, how spiritually mature they are, and you create a number code. And basically you evaluate them, and you break them into 4 categories. They're either beneficial relationships, that this is a good influence in my life. It's good that I'm connected with this friend. Or it could be an underutilized relationship or a detrimental relationship. A detrimental friendship, in other words, you say, this person is really not spiritually strong. They're pulling me down, and I'm spending way too much time with them. That's considered a detrimental relationship or a detrimental friendship. That means you need to back off from that relationship a little bit so that you can be spiritually stronger. The third category is what's called the underutilized friendships. That's basically the people that they're spiritually strong, but really you could make some improvements to make sure that you're hanging out with those kinds of people that make you sharp and not make you dull. The underutilized relationships, you consider them a friend, but you really don't spend much time with them. Maybe that's someone that you need to go out of your way to spend time with them. And then those are the categories: detrimental, underutilized, and beneficial, and something else, right? Something else. You'll have to read the book to find out the other item, what that is. But Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. So a good thing to ask about your friends or your relationship is, do they make you sharp or dull? Do my friends make me sharp spiritually? Do my friends make me sharp morally? Do my friends make me sharp intellectually? See, these are all things to ask, to examine your relationships, because your relationships are indispensable to your success in college and in life, period. A student at Iowa State said the majority of lifelong, quote-unquote, friendships forged in college are not that, but a mechanism to dull the pains of college and for the purpose of entertainment. They can be split over an argument, and any pacts previously made only exacerbate the anger over the hurting or broken hearts that result. It is much easier to forget that you love certain people. Some friendships are nothing more than idle words for years. It's difficult for God to influence your heart when your allegiance is like a pendulum swaying to the nearest friend. This can become an addiction. It's very important. At college, there's lots of superficiality, and there's lots of superficial relationships that can be formed out of convenience. It's very important that you don't have fair weather friends, but you evaluate, how spiritually strong are these people, and how much time am I spending with them? And make sure that you're valuing your own time well in what relationships you're building and what relationships maybe you need to take more advantage of, and what relationships you need to step back from. Develop spiritual ties instead of soul ties. Basically, a soul tie is formed, what we call a soul tie is formed when we become friends with people to meet our emotional needs. Those are generally end up being very destructive relationships. When we form relationships with people simply because there's an emotional void in us, so that we form unhealthy bonds with people that's not spiritual at all, it's completely emotional. Those tend to be very destructive. That's when you have a friend that you are connected to because of what they do to meet your emotional needs, what you'll generally find is that person one day will cease to adequately meet your emotional needs. Why? Because that other person's not supposed to meet your emotional needs. God's supposed to meet our emotional needs. And so when you form a soul tie, then a lot of times you get overly attached, as we see this in dating relationships all the time. You can get totally attached and hung up on the wrong person, and it's a destructive relationship. But develop spiritual ties. What's a spiritual tie? A spiritual tie is formed when we become friends with people, not because we need them to fulfill our emotional needs, but because we share a mutual desire for God. Because we've already got our emotional needs met in God, and so we have the added blessing of someone that can come along and fuel that fire and be a strength to us and an encouragement to us. And it's not a codependence thing, but it's two strong people coming together to be even stronger. So develop spiritual ties and not soul ties. Someone who craves spiritual ties over soul ties is someone who has learned to have their emotional needs met in God first and above all else. So that's indispensable relationship number 3. Here's number 4. Relationship with your future mate. Relationship with your future mate. Now this is a fun one because, and here's a point, don't mess this one up. This is big. Here's some popular questions and dilemmas that I know a lot of young people think about, particularly when they're teenagers, but even carrying on into the college age. Isn't it good to date around to get to know the opposite sex? Isn't dating good experience and training for marriage? Okay, so sex is wrong before marriage, but nobody's perfect and I have needs. Can I just ask God for forgiveness and be okay? Can I experiment a little bit? Playing around isn't the same as sex, right? I don't want to be a total dork. How bad can a little touching and kissing be so I know what to do when I meet the person I want to be with for the rest of my life? Or I don't even know how to act right around the opposite sex. I'm scared of being single forever and that no one will love me. How should I treat them? Or I struggle with loneliness all the time. I make relationship mistakes on a consistent basis, get attached to the wrong person and end up getting hurt and rejected. How do I deal with the hurt I feel inside? A lot of these emotions, a lot of these questions rolling around in young people's minds. But just to put it in terms of relationships as a game, if you think of it in terms of a game for a minute, it's like in a game, there's certain rules. When you're talking about finding that mate, that future mate, there's certain rules. There's a goal. That goal, the biblical goal, is marriage. Now, the world may have a different goal. The world's goal may be for self-gratification. It's about me. It could be about selfishness. But when you get two selfish people together, it ends up being a destructive, painful relationship where nobody is grateful at the end of the day. So you want to have a rewarding relationship, then you do pursue relationships and set your desires after what the Bible, that pattern that's laid out for us. The goal in this game, the rules of the relationship game, is marriage. The prize, sex and companionship. See, sex is a good thing. God created sex. Sex is to be a good thing, but it's so abused. It's been so perverted. And actually, statistics show that the people that have the best sex life are married couples. Who knew? God's idea was the best. The prize is sex and companionship. It's a wonderful thing. The opponents, well, I call the opponents the jerks and the tramps. And we'll talk about the jerks and the tramps in a minute. These are the bad relationships that we find ourselves entangled in. That there's a good way to avoid those relationships. The winning strategy: faithfulness to God, love, integrity, friendship, and courtship. Faithfulness to God, love, integrity, friendship, and courtship. And that's kind of what a lot of times when, be talking to teenagers and you see certain ones, kind of their eyes glaze over at that point. They're checked out. Faithfulness to God, boring, and they check out. But of course then they'll miss out on some of the most important keys to a rewarding relationship. You know what the losing strategy is? The losing strategy is what 90% of young people do. It's called experimentation, lust, selfishness, and dating around. That is a losing strategy. That strategy is part of the reason the divorce rate is so high. So just some basic things. How to treat people of the opposite sex. Well, 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 1 through 2 talks about the interrelationship of believers. It says, "Never speak harshly to an older man, but appeal to him respectfully as though he were your own father. Talk to the younger men as you would to your own brothers. Treat the older women as you would your mother, and treat the younger women with all purity as your own sisters." So that we see there's this protocol of respect and that goes in the relationships between people of the opposite sex. How boys are supposed to treat girls, basically. If you're supposed to treat younger women with purity as your own sisters, then it's not appropriate for you to treat them like sexual objects. Hopefully you wouldn't have sex with your sister. Treat them with kindness and tender affection. Protect them as the gentler sex. And if you ever want to get married and have a happy marriage at that, you'll learn these principles first. If you don't know how to treat a woman, it's the way the Bible teaches, then you need to learn those principles before you ever get into a marriage relationship, or it'll kind of blow up in your face. So that's how guys are supposed to treat girls. This is how girls are supposed to treat the guys. Don't try to, again, brother, sister, don't try to seduce them to boost your self-image. How many messed up guys did we know that I can reflect on back in those days that they get hung up, and there'd be that girl that you knew she was dangerous, that just had to have every guy like her when she comes around, and she just kind of do that, and then the guys would get their heart attached on that girl or whatever, and then she just moves on to the next guy to make her feel good about herself. Don't do that to guys. Don't try to seduce them to boost your self-image. You wouldn't sexually tease your brother. Treat them with care and respect. Be helpful and considerate, not competing for dominance. If you ever want to get married and have a happy marriage at that, learn from the man-hating, lonely feminist. You want to dominate and don't respect men. Men will tolerate you for a while if they think you're hot. But you guys can loosen up just a little bit here. But eventually they will look elsewhere and you'll be left alone. Okay, so how to avoid jerks and tramps. Here's the classic jerk in the Bible, Amnon. Amnon was a big-time jerk. You remember the story of Amnon. He was one of David's sons who had strong feelings for Tamar, his stepsister. He seduces her, rapes her, and once he gets what he wants, he disposes of her like trash and hates her. You think, oh, what a jerk Amnon is. But ladies, pay attention to me for a moment. It will save you a lot of heartache. I tell the teens this, but if you haven't heard this before, I've got a news flash for you, ladies. All men are naturally jerks. I want you to understand, I'm not even joking. I'm totally serious. All men are naturally jerks. Are all men like Amnon? No. Most men don't care too much for guys who can't control themselves. Not because they don't have sexual urges and want to use people selfishly, but because they realize that's wrong, deny themselves, and use self-control. But any man who does not consistently renew his mind will naturally gravitate away from acting like Christ and acting more like Amnon. Men are very visual and are stimulated by sight. That's why it's good to dress and conduct yourself with modesty. Women, you don't have to advertise to get guys' attention. We notice you already. You don't have to flaunt it. You don't have to advertise. And here's another clue. If you dress with modesty, it doesn't make you less attractive. It just means that we're slower to approach you because we respect you more. Women often dress seductively because they seek love from a man. But all it really does is stimulate our inner Amnon who desires to use you, not to love you. So just understand that you make that distinction. You don't have to advertise. We notice you already. And if you dress in a way that shows that it's advertising, then again, it draws men that want to use you, not men that want to love you. Most guys, if they were honest, are drawn to girls who advertise for short-term relationships. But they're actually more attracted to the girl who respects herself and is modest. Those are the ones they want to be with long-term. See, the reason many guys don't actively pursue these types of girls as much is because they have a greater fear of rejection from these types of girls. Girls, you're so scared and insecure. Guys are the same way. We're a mess, and you don't even see it or know it. Tough guy. No. They're cowards. Men can be real cowards on this issue. But the reason there's a greater fear of rejection from these types of girls because they have more to lose by being turned down. If they lose the girl who's easy, they haven't really lost much, have they? There are plenty of others just like her. But if they lose the girl with virtues, they've really lost something valuable. Can I get an amen from the guys? Okay. So that's the classic jerk. Stay away from jerks. There's plenty of jerks at college. Here's a tramp, Delilah. What does Delilah do? She seduces Samson with her incredible beauty and hypnotic charm, then manipulates him and makes his life hell until he breaks down and gives her what she wants, leading to his total humiliation and death. Yikes. Guys, don't try to rescue Delilah. Guys make the mistake of trying to be some girl's knight in shining armor, and they get themselves into a huge mess and in many cases destroy their own lives. Note, that girl is not interested in fixing her problems. That's why she has so many. She's only interested in using you for what she can get out of you because she's a parasite who lives off of sucking the life out of others. Delilah is out there. And we use these graphic examples, but they do correspond to reality, don't they? There are some Amnons out there to watch out for. There are some Delilahs. And it's not necessarily that they consider themselves like that, and yet sometimes subconsciously guys can act a certain way or the girl can act a certain way that does that. The point is, take care of your relationship with God and be strong in your relationship with God. That's going to help you to discern those things. And if you're obedient to God and you're loyal to Him, that'll keep you out of some trouble. So how do I find the right mate? 1 Corinthians 7, verses 32 through 35. It says, in everything you do, Paul writes, I want you to be free from the concerns of this life. Free from the concerns of this life. In everything, I want you to be free from the concerns of this life. He's actually writing to single people right now. He says, an unmarried man can spend his time doing the Lord's work and thinking how to please Him. But a married man can't do that so well. He has to think about his earthly responsibilities and how to please his wife. His interests are divided. In the same way, a woman who is not married can be more devoted to the Lord in body and in spirit, while the married woman must be concerned about her earthly responsibilities and how to please her husband. I'm saying this for your benefit, not to place restrictions on you. I want you to do whatever will help you serve the Lord best with as few distractions as possible. Now, what is he saying here? Is he saying that it's carnal and bad to be married because of the earthly responsibilities? No, he's saying in order to be a good single person, you have a primary job, not of finding your mate. Your primary job is not to find who you can hook up with. Your primary job is to please the Lord and to care for the things of the Lord. See, when marriage comes on, it's not that your job changes. It's not that that goes away. It's because you've done so good at being a single person who cares for the things of the Lord that you're now laid the foundation and prepared a foundation that you can successfully be married and add the other responsibilities that go with that. See, the best training for marriage is not dating, it's how you conduct yourself as a single person. Why? Because you got two halves that come together, you've got two wholes. Which relationship's going to be better? And you don't become a whole person while dating somebody. That's just the reality. You become a whole person by learning how to depend on God. And that's something that you do on your own for yourself. Here's another thing to think about. Ephesians 5, verse 33. Love and respect. So again, I say each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. You may have heard it says that women need love, guys need respect. And again, you may be thinking, well, I'm just thinking about college. What are you talking about future mate for? I'm not thinking about marriage. I'm just thinking about college. Well, because what you do in college could have a big impact on that next thing, which is possibly the most important decision in your life. And where you go to college could be this, well, your most important decision is making Jesus the Lord of your life. Second most is probably who you marry. And thirdly, what you do after high school is probably right up there. So, men need respect, women need love. Now, how does this translate into the college life? So, if you neglect your responsibilities to God to chase after a boyfriend or girlfriend, are you acting in that person's best interest or your own? Your own. So what you're saying is you're not loving or respecting your future spouse as much as you're seeking self-gratification. You know what that means? You might as well in a t-shirt that says, "Do not marry me, I'm trouble." When you put self-gratification over truly loving and respecting, keeping your future mate in mind, then you're not ready for a relationship. If you're seeking to gratify self with another person, you're not mature enough to even be capable of true love and would not make a good candidate for marriage. Okay, so ladies, when guys fool around with a bunch of other girls before they get to you, does that make you feel loved? Would you prefer to marry someone who has only given himself to you or 100 ladies before you? Is he more or less trustworthy as a spouse? So guys, when girls fool around with a bunch of guys before they get to you, does that make you feel more or less honored to be with them? Is she more or less trustworthy as a mate? See, these are things to be thinking about. Because the game is going on the college campus, and you don't want to be part of that game. Because guess what? Those emotions get kicked in and your brain goes kaput. And then everything goes out the window if you don't go into it discerning in the first place. Okay, I mentioned date. So if dating is not the answer, what is? Well, if you and your future spouse can both focus on being the best single people you can be for God, when the time comes, you won't have to look for each other. Because this is something, because I, at youth I talk about you don't need to date. And then the teens, of course, then ask, well, if I can't date, how am I supposed to find the person I'm supposed to marry? That's just it. You don't have to. Why? Because if you both focus on being the best single people you can be for God, when the time comes, you won't have to look for each other. You'll stand out in the crowd without having to shop around among cheaper merchandise. Build your relationship with God so you can hear His voice in your conscience when the right one comes along. Pray for your future spouse. Be diligent to your current relationships with your family and friends. How you act in your regular relationships could play over into how you treat your future mate. Go out with the opposite sex in group settings only, not flirting with temptation, going one-on-one. Court the person you plan on marrying, not date around until they come along, only confusing yourself and others. See, that being one of the most important decisions, who you marry, that will happen in your life, it's really important that you hear God on that one. But if you play the dating game, that means for all kinds of other people, that was you shut God off for self-gratification. And so when the right one comes along, you can't discern it because you seared your conscience from, so it becomes even more confusing. Is this right? Is this God? I don't know if it's God. Do you think it's God? I don't know if it's right. And so you confuse yourself on one of the most important decisions you'll ever make in your life. That's why dating is dangerous. Court the person you plan on marrying, not date around until they come along, only confusing yourself and others. Remain sexually pure. How? 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18 says, "Flee fornication. Flee fornication. Fornication is from the Greek word porneia, where we get pornography. But that Greek word refers to all sexual expression not between a man and a wife. See, if you won't just think in terms of, well, okay, what's as much that I can get away with and still be okay? Or what's as much that I can get away with and still be a virgin, quote unquote. No, it says flee fornication. That's all sexual expression. Not how close to the line can I get without crossing over it, because if that's the game you play, you'll always go too far. But drawing the line far before that line even comes so that God can bless you. Flee fornication, all sexual expression. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 1 says, he says it's not good for a man to touch a woman. What was he talking about? Paul said. Well, the word touch in the Greek means to ignite passion. So there's different words used for touch in Scripture. This particular word means to ignite passion. I once heard the Christian apologist Ravi Zacharias teach an incredible message on one of the key characteristics of Daniel that led to his greatness and his promotion by God that I think is very applicable to sexual purity. He said this: some people will live in a way, I kind of referred to this earlier, but he said some people will live in a way to see how far they can go as close to the wrong side of living, and Daniel wanted to see how far he could stay away from that line and still retain contact and effectiveness. If it is possible that any of our lives have gone wrong, may I suggest to you, it is not when you chose to cross the line, but it is possibly a line which was not drawn well before the line that was ultimately crossed. It is easier to say no before you have tasted it than to say no after you have tasted it. In conclusion, there will be times when you'll have to be alone, but there's never a time when you have to be lonely. A.W. Tozier describes faith in a beautiful way. He describes faith as looking with the inward eyes into the all-seeing eyes of God. What a powerful image. Looking with the inward eyes into the all-seeing eyes of God. See, when we're feeling lonely, our inward eyes are not looking at God, are they? They're looking at ourselves. And that's not to condemn you for feeling lonely, because we all are tempted to feel that way, but understand to give in to those feelings is not good or healthy. Because God is always there. Take our eyes off of ourselves and put them on God. When we're feeling lonely, our inward eyes are focused on ourselves. I love this story. A teenage girl, this is a true story. A teenage girl was sitting at a table with a bunch of her peers eating lunch. The guy sitting next to her noticed she looked kind of upset and depressed. He asked her, "What's wrong?" To which she replied, "I don't have any friends." The young man and the other teens seated next to the girl were taken back by the comment for a moment, then proceeded to pick up their things and move to another table. See, if we prioritize the right relationships by being a friend of God, being accountable to our leaders, staying connected to our church and family, choosing the right friends instead of seeking acceptance in the wrong crowd, and maintaining purity in our relationships with the opposite sex, loneliness will disappear and the relationships in our lives will bring blessing and contentment. Thank you. You'll take a break and come back for the last section. Lemmings on Parade.